Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is shot whilst on a protest march. He says the government is responsible. I'm Kerry Johnston. This is Aljazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, Benjamin Netanyahu will be Israel's next Prime Minister, with his coalition securing a majority in the Knesset. Funerals are held in the occupied territories after Israeli forces kill 4 Palestinians. And some of the world's most famous glaciers will disappear within 30 years. Experts are calling for urgent action to save the rest. Former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has been shot at a rally. He's blaming 3 top officials, including Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Khan was leading a protest march to demand snap elections when a gunman opened fire. Party officials say he was hit in the leg, but his condition is not serious. Osama bin Javid reports.
This is the moment former Prime Minister Imran Khan was shot in the leg. Chaos broke out after the leader of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party was attacked.
May God protect Imran Khan. By the grace of God, we are okay. Some of our compatriots are wounded and one has been killed. Please keep us all in your prayers.
Other party leaders were also wounded. Police arrested the gunman, who's reportedly confessed to the attack. He said he wanted to stop Khan from, quote, misleading people. With some politicians demanding revenge, the party's leadership called for calm.
We're all organizing shortly in each city in Pakistan that we find ourselves in as a mark of our protest. We do not intend to attack anyone. We do not intend to allow anyone to attack us either, but that's a story for later.
Imran Khan was leading a slow-moving march to the capital Islamabad from the city of Lahore, about 350 kilometers to the south. The convoy hoped to force the government to give up power. Since losing the premiership through a no-confidence vote in April, Khan has insisted he will not stop campaigning until early elections are held. The attack is likely to further fuel political unrest.
Some members of Imran Khan's own party have been on record calling it a bloody march and expressing the apprehension that the march could get bloody and could get out of control.
Imran Khan is out of danger, and without providing any proof, his party's Secretary General says Khan told him to name the alleged attackers.
I have no doubt 3 people involved in this are PM Shehbaz Sharif, Interior Minister Rana Sanaullah and Major General Faisal. Our demand is all 3 be removed from their posts, and if they're not removed, then there'll be countrywide protest.
Protests have already broken out in several cities. The Prime Minister has called for an investigation and condemned the violence. All political leaders, including those who oppose Imran Khan, have reiterated the condemnation. But that's unlikely to bring down political temperature as Pakistan enters another phase of instability. Osama bin Javid, Aljazeera.
Well, Pakistan has a history of political assassinations going back as far as 1951. That's when the country's first Prime Minister after partition, Liaquat Ali Khan, was shot dead. In 2007, 2-time Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto was assassinated in a gun and bomb attack after holding an election rally. Her father, the country's 9th Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was hanged in 1979. He was convicted of conspiring to commit a political murder, but it was disputed. Imran Khan spoke to Al Jazeera earlier this week. He was defiant, insisting he was willing to die for what he called his freedom struggle.
There's always a threat. When you are challenging the status quo, there's always a threat. But that should not stop you from doing what I believe is a genuine freedom struggle. For me, it is better to die rather than to live a life of slaves under this imported government of crooks. If I have to live under them, I'd prefer death rather than living under these criminals.
Hassan Khan is a journalist based in Islamabad. He says Imran Khan hasn't provided any evidence to back up his allegations against key government officials.
It's too early to blame the country prime minister and the interior minister and the senior military officer But what Khan is doing, he is already cashing it, the political capital out of this attack. Is very unfortunate. And despite the fact that the Punjab government, the province where this attack happened, that is ruled by the Khan party, and Khan himself is responsible for the governance and the security, because so far he was far away from the federal capital. But unfortunately, it was a type of a knee-jerk reaction by Mr. Khan that he has accused the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, the Interior Minister, Rana Sanaullah, and a senior military officer, accusing them of targeting him in a rally. And the interesting part is a senior leader of Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Insaf, from Punjab. He's a senator also. One day before, he has said that there will be an attack on Mr. Khan convoy when he reaches Wazirabad, and this happened in Wazirabad. So too many things are, I think it's too murky. Nothing is clear so far.
Israel's next Prime Minister will be Benjamin Netanyahu after he secured a majority in the Knesset along with his right-wing allies. Caretaker leader Yair Lapid has conceded and congratulated Netanyahu, who's already Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. He's been leader for a total of 15 years over multiple terms, but is facing corruption charges. With all of the votes now counted, the bloc led by Netanyahu and his Likud party has secured a majority of 64 seats in the Knesset. Outgoing Prime Minister Yair Lapid's bloc claimed 51 seats, with other parties winning the remaining 5. Stephanie Decker has more from West Jerusalem.
Last year, people thought that perhaps it'd finally be the end of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I was in Tel Aviv on the night that he was no longer Prime Minister, and there was massive celebrations. And what most people were telling me were saying that it wasn't particularly that, the new Prime Minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, wasn't about support for him, but it was about the fact that it was time for a change. Well, Netanyahu at the time vowed to bring down the government and vowed to return to the Prime Minister's seat, and that seems very much what he has done, and he has done it with a vengeance. He's bringing with him the most right-wing government Israel has ever seen. He's bringing with him, religious ultra-nationalists that have a presence in parliament, in the Israeli Knesset, of 14 seats, the third largest party. So it's hugely significant in terms of how it's changed the political landscape, if you will. It depends who you speak to. Some people who supported this say that only Benjamin Netanyahu can lead the country, and say that, this ultra-nationalist faction, that they're not as bad as they seem. But others are extremely concerned. Also, Palestinians saying that, someone like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a very controversial figure, who's called for the expulsion of Palestinians, who called for the annexation of the West Bank, who's called for the right for Jews to prayer on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, which is hugely inflammatory, a red line not just for Palestinians, but for the Muslim world in general. So he is going to be someone that more than likely will have a major seat in cabinet.
Israel says it's attacking Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip. It comes after Israeli forces said they intercepted a rocket fired from the Strip that reportedly caused an explosion over the south of the country. It's the first such missile fired at Israel since August. Well, there's been a wave of violence in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israeli forces shot dead a number of Palestinians who were accused of attacking soldiers. Laura Burden-Manley reports.
The body of Farouk Salameh is carried through the streets of Jenin in the north of the occupied West Bank, reported to be a prominent commander of the armed Islamic Jihad group. He died when Israeli forces raided a refugee camp. The group is calling it a cowardly assassination.
The reaction of the resistance will be God-willing inside Israeli cities. However, our main aim now in Jenin camp is to protect our people, land and camp.
The health ministry says a 14-year-old boy was also killed. Their deaths come as more than 30 diplomats visited Nablus and as Israeli forces lifted a 3-week siege of that city.
This occupation is fleeting, like the rest of the occupations throughout history. And the second message is that collective punishment cannot continue.
Further south in the village of Beit Duku, more devastation for Palestinian families. Mourners carry the body of Dawood Rayan, shot dead by Israeli forces, who say he threw a firebomb towards them.
The occupation army invaded the village with combat units, where it had already decided to kill. The young men confronted them.
To the west, in occupied East Jerusalem's Old City, police blocked off streets as blood was washed from the ground. Israeli forces shot dead a Palestinian near the Al-Aqsa Mosque after they accused him of stabbing a soldier.
Professional and determined action to neutralize the terrorists and most likely prevented injury to innocent civilians. We will continue to be in the same readiness with the same alert of the police officers for every event.
It comes following Israel's general election that's seen the far right gain more power. So far this year, more than 130 Palestinians have been killed as Israel intensifies raids. It says it's combating militants. Palestinians say it's an attempt to crush uprisings. Laura Burden-Manley, Aljazeera.
A protest in Iran has turned violent as people mourn a woman who was shot dead. Hadis Najafi was killed in September when she spoke out against the country's hijab mandate. With our reports, security forces opened fire during the protest in Karaj. State television says a security officer was killed and 10 police officers injured. Well, several prominent Iranian human rights lawyers have publicly criticized the country's rulers, saying they will fall because people are no longer afraid of violent crackdowns. There's been ongoing unrest since 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died in police custody in September. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has hosted US senators in Kiev. Zelensky welcomed Chris Coons and Rob Portman to the Ukrainian capital. Portman is a Republican, while Coons is a Democrat. They've held a joint visit to Ukraine ahead of the US midterm elections next week. South Korea's defense minister is in the US as tensions rise on the Korean peninsula. Jong Suk-lee met Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin after North Korea fired a series of missiles earlier this week. Well, Seoul responded with several launches of its own. Patty Culhane is following the visit.
The timing of this meeting at the Pentagon is very important because things are so tense in that region. What's going on is North Korea says it's launching these record numbers of missiles and sensitive areas because they feel they've been provoked by the U.S. and South Korea. Under the Trump presidency, these annual military exercises largely stopped because at the time they said they wanted to give diplomacy a chance. Well, that didn't pan out. So the Pentagon says they're not trying to provoke North Korea. They're just going back to the exercises they've always done. But there are a lot of U.S.-South Korea exercises going on. Earlier, they sent a U.S. aircraft carrier. There were land-based exercises. And now they're doing something called Vigilant Storm. That's about 240 planes from the U.S. and South Korea training jointly. And those are supposed to end on Friday, but they were already announced that they were going to extend that. So when Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said they were going to be extended, it's not clear if he's going to add on more time to what they were already planning. Pentagon says they're still trying to figure that out. Obviously, the big concern is another nuclear test from North Korea. Now, for his part, the South Korean Minister of Defense Lee said he believes that North Korea is ready to launch a nuclear test, but he said the when and for what political reasons remains to be seen.
Secretary Austin and I affirmed that any nuclear attack by the DPRK, including the use of tactical nuclear weapons, is unacceptable and result in the end of Kim Jong-un regime by the overwhelming and decisive response of the alliance.
So here at the Pentagon, tough talk, a clear indication that tensions in the region are not going to calm down anytime soon.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has arrived in China for talks with President Xi Jinping. Scholz is the first G7 leader to be granted a state visit to China since the start of the pandemic. Patrick Falk has more from Beijing.
Well, one headline in Chinese state media said the German Chancellor's visit was aimed at hitting the brakes on the EU's extreme confrontational stance on China. And there certainly has been much tougher rhetoric coming from Europe, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Beijing's refusal to condemn Moscow for it. But Olaf Scholz's visit has come under extreme scrutiny, with many in Europe saying that it signals a lack of a unified voice within the bloc on how to deal with Beijing, and that Germany's making the same mistakes as it did with Russia. That is perhaps why this is such a fleeting visit. Scholz will only be here for about 24 hours. He'll be accompanied by business executives, and the focus of his talks with Chinese leaders is expected expected to be business. Notably, he's the first Western leader to come to China after President Xi Jinping secured a historic third term. And this is expected to be framed by China as an endorsement of Xi's new government.
Supporters of outgoing Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro are still on the streets protesting his loss on Sunday. They want the military to keep him in power. Bolsonaro says he will follow the constitution and has told demonstrators to go home. President-elect Lula da Silva will be inaugurated on January the 1st. His team has now begun the transition of power, holding meetings with Bolsonaro and other key lawmakers.
He has the most important job in the country, a person that was convicted on 3 instances. It cannot be. So we will fight until the last minute to turn this situation around. That's why we are here. If we need to be here for 2 months, we will. If we need to be here for 3 months, we will.
Air pollution levels in New Delhi are soaring to dangerous levels, spurring calls to shut schools in the Indian capital. The city's air quality has dipped into the severe category. One of the major drivers of the pollution is crop burning by farmers in the states of Punjab and Haryana. UNESCO says some of the world's most famous glaciers will vanish by 2050, regardless of any rise in global temperatures, and it's urging leaders to act fast to save the rest. The UN agency's report shows that 1/3 of glaciers at 50 World Heritage Sites are condemned to disappear, including those in Yellowstone and Kilimanjaro National Parks. The glaciers are losing 58 billion tons of ice every year. That's the combined annual water use of France and Spain. The melting glaciers are responsible for nearly 5% of the global sea level rise. Mark Howden is a climate change expert at the Australian National University. He says that glacial melt is speeding up the planet's freshwater crisis.
Well, when a glacier melts, what you see is an immediate increase in water availability downstream. And so it gives a false sense of security to people. They think there's plenty of water. But once that glacier melts, you have less and less water during the summer period when typically that melt occurs. And that means that things like irrigation downstream or supply of water for cities is going to be interrupted. And so less water in the longer term, even though we may get a little bit more water in the short term. But that water in the short term can also cause glacial lakes to disrupt. So often these lakes are formed by the rocky debris, the sort of rocks left by glacial melt previously. And so they form dams. And sometimes those dams can break and you get catastrophic flooding. And we've seen a couple of instances of that lately where we get really big damage downstream. So, and obviously that water has to go somewhere. It ends up in our oceans, and that's why we're getting sea level rise. And part of that sea level rise is due to glaciers in those World Heritage areas and everywhere else as well melting. Last year it was about 4.5 millimeters, and that's quite scary. And so when we look at how that propagates out into the future, we see really significant threats for low-lying islands and low-lying areas such as in Bangladesh or other parts of the world. And so there's multiple contributions to that. So glaciers are one contributor to that, breakdown of ice sheets like on Greenland or another, but also expansion of the ocean as it warms up is also a contributor. And when we add all of these up, we're actually ending up with quite scary scenarios. At a low level, perhaps a half a metre sea level rise by the end of this century, at a high level, a metre or possibly more by the end of this century.
Residents of Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo are on edge as the armed group M23 approaches the city from the north. Thousands have already fled as the rebels seize swathes of territory in the east. The unrest has inflamed regional tensions with authorities in Kinshasa, accusing Rwanda of backing M23. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi has called on youth to mobilize and support the armed forces.
The aggression and occupation of territories in North Kivu is perpetrated by the terrorist group known as the M23, with proven support of men and logistics from Rwanda. The war imposed on us by our neighbors demands sacrifices from each of us. It's time to silence our political differences and defend our motherland together. In response to the strong demand from the youth, I invite them to organize themselves to support, accompany, and reinforce our defense and security forces in their mission.
The Netherlands has closed 2 unregistered Chinese government missions on Dutch soil. A civil rights group says it's discovered the missions, which operate as police stations in more than 30 countries. Step Lassen reports from Rotterdam.
It doesn't look anything like a police station, but this flat in Rotterdam is on a Chinese list of overseas missions used for consular activities like extending passports and driver's licenses, but also to do police work, like sending home Chinese nationals accused of committing crimes. But it goes further than that, according to a Spanish civil rights group, which says it has evidence that these stations also spy on dissidents and intimidate them.
These tactics include threats and harassment of family, detention of family members, covert agents, or these kind of stations being involved in tracking people directly wherever they are around the world.
Activist Wang Yingju says a person claiming to work at an overseas police station in Rotterdam contacted him earlier this year.
He said he's from Chinese overseas service, and he asked me to go to Rotterdam immediately. And he asked me thinking about my parents. And he also asked me to go back to China, solve my problem.
Wang, who says he's wanted in China for political activity, says he broke off the contact after he felt threatened. Aljazeera can't independently verify his claims. The Dutch foreign minister has ordered the Chinese ambassador to close the undeclared consular stations, since they did not apply for an official license. But China denies the service centers are illegal police stations.
What I can tell you is that according to what we know, the institutions you mention are not police stations or police service centres. Their activities are meant to assist local Chinese citizens who need to renew expired driving licences online and provide health check-up services.
This address is one of 30 listed by a Chinese website as one of Fuzhou's overseas police stations. But when we spoke to the daughter of the man accused of running it, she denies any consular activities are taking place. And she says there's certainly no intimidation or harassment coming from this apartment.
I just want to say, no, it's not true. I don't know what people are talking about, and I feel very offended because this is like happening. Our private life is like, we don't know what to do because we can... I don't know what to say because only this is the first thing for me and for my family as well.
In the UK, the government also takes the reports very seriously, and they started an investigation.
The protection of people in the United Kingdom is of the utmost importance, and any attempt to illegally repatriate any individual will not be tolerated.
Government investigators will now have to find evidence if this is what has been happening at what China calls its overseas service centers. Step Vassen, Aljazeera in Rotterdam.
There are just 16 days to go before the FIFA World Cup kicks off in Qatar. And new attractions for fans are opening up across the country. Victoria Gatenby has more from Lusail.
Well, this festival is to mark the official opening of Lusail Boulevard, which is a significant landmark when it comes to the Qatar 2022 World Cup, because at the end of this now pedestrianised zone is Lusail Stadium, and that's where the World Cup final will be held. Organisers say this event is going to be typical of the sorts of events that fans who come to the World Cup will be able to attend for free. We've seen lots of fans already in their new national kits. And while all of them talk about looking forward to the fact that they'll be able to see some of the world's best footballers compete off the pitch, there is a battle of the brands that is heating up too.
The German sports firm Adidas has traditionally been the reigning champion when it comes to football branding. But for the third consecutive World Cup, American sportswear company Nike is sponsoring more shirts than its rivals. It secured deals with 13 of the 32 national teams in the tournament, including favourites Brazil. Adidas has designed shirts for only 7. One is Mexico's away shirt, inspired by a mythical feathered serpent, and Japan's home kit incorporates elements of popular Japanese comics. Brand experts say companies are under a lot of commercial pressure to produce a shirt that sells well.
Companies are all looking for a standout design,
something that's attractive, gets a lot of notice, and primarily that the fans will buy. That's the main objective, is to get as many replica sales as they can over a relatively short period of the event.
Not all designs have been well received. The front of Switzerland's shirt, designed by German firm Puma, has been likened to a QR code. And Adidas's shirt for Algeria has angered Morocco. It says the geometric blue, teal and yellow design is common in Moroccan mosaics and amounts to cultural appropriation.
The situation today is really bad. And if Adidas had really looked at that, they would have been, I mean, it's something that happens when you have a multinational in Germany designing shirts for a culture that they may not be familiar with.
Tensions between countries will be high on the pitch. Off it, the battle of the brands is its own high-stakes affair.
One of the biggest groups of supporters expected to arrive here in Qatar in the coming weeks is the one from Mexico. An estimated 80,000 Mexican fans, and on hand to help them with everything from where to go to what to see is one of the dedicated fan leaders.
I provide the fans, Mexican fans, information from Supreme Committee like do's and don'ts, the things that they can do in Qatar, what they can read, the requirements to enter the country. But I also organize events for Mexican fans coming to the World Cup, during the World Cup, of course, and cultural activations, fan engagement, community engagement, and a lot of fun things.
Organisers say there's more than 400 fan leaders from more than 60 countries who will engage with fans and help them get the most out of their time here in Qatar.